Okay, you can go now.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Bar Talk, October 26th. And unfortunately, I've got to zoom in here not from my office, so I hope my connectivity is going just fine. There have been a few things that have occurred since our last Bar Talk. And Angela, did you want to just give us an update on what Governor Mills did regarding motor vehicles?
Sure. So there was an EO number 15, and basically there were 3 executive orders in the past from last year, 53, 53A, and 53A2, which adjusted certain deadlines with respect to motor vehicle registrations. And although this isn't necessarily legally related, we thought it would be of importance to all of you, for those of you who maybe have not registered your vehicle in 2020. And what that executive order lays out is basically if you purchased a vehicle or you had a registration expire within certain dates, you have some, like at the beginning of the year, between January 1st and March 15th, you must get your car registered immediately. And then there are several other ones between March 15th and May 31st. You have 60 days. From June 1st to September 30th, you have 120 days. And then after October 1st, you fall under the registration requirements set forth in the revised statutes. So just be advised that you can now be stopped and fined if you don't get this taken care of soon.
Thank you, Angela. I know that all of us had kind of been watching for these civil orders of emergency to see whether or not our requirements under the Bureau of Motor Vehicles would change, and here's one rollout. So one of the other things I wanted to let you know is last week we did, as an association, sent a letter. I think it was contemporaneously with the Maine Trial Lawyers Association too, to Chief Mead, where we asked to be involved with cautionary rules and procedures related to starting up the jury trials. And I think the focus on the jury trial startups is going to be on criminal cases, but civil cases will soon follow too. And I think you'll have a link or be able to check that out on our website also. And then we did also have an administrative week this week that starts. So just know that your courts will be closed from 8 to 12 every day, and reopen at 12 for business until 4. Then there was another thing that I wanted to let you know that had come up. I guess primarily the issues have been run into in Penobscot County or District 5, but there may be other courts that you have run into with this issue, and that is that there is a marshal shortage. It's not that there are fewer marshals now in our judicial branch, it's that the judicial branch, since COVID-19 has been the priority, has also required that all entrances into the courthouses be staffed by marshals. So what that means is we used to have, if you remember, random appearances of marshals for staffing entrances into court. Portland might have been more often than other courts, but a lot of courts had marshals one day, maybe not the next. But now that at the entrances, and now that COVID-19 is upon us, the entrances are all staffed now by policy of the judicial branch at all times. So to make sure everyone's asked the questions they need to be asked and monitored coming in. So that means that there have been times where marshals simply couldn't staff courts. So across Maine, I guess I'm finding out that this has come to a head, or it's happening at least maybe more often or was brought to my attention just recently, that we need to check the judicial branch website in order to, before we go travel to a court, which is probably much more of an issue in the upper counties, to make sure that the court's going to be open when you get there, you know, if you're trying to hand file a motion or something like that. So I wanted to share that with you. The other thing I wanted to share with you was PMO FJC 2 subpart G. I don't know who we have for listeners today that use this subpart, but my understanding is it's still in effect, and it's used widely by a number of attorneys who are, you know, letting their employees work remotely or working remotely themselves. That there is a signature that's allowed, the /S/ and then your name printed across the signature line for doing prints, or excuse me, doing filings. And I know that we just got a message. Let me just see here. If all right, good. So we're looking for sites. Yeah, we can put sites in the chat. But I just want to make sure I'm still being heard, because I am at one bar and I'm glad you can all hear me. All right, so I think that I've addressed what's kind of on my hit list. I wanted to make sure that we give some time to our special guests, which are Stacy Stitham and Meredith Eilers. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Meredith.
You are.
And excellent. Are both of you online right now? I wanted to kind of let everyone know we've asked both of these attorneys to speak to us a little bit about their experience doing a hybrid model of trial for their civil case, and the logistics they kind of went through for this, so that it might be of use for us in the future. So Meredith, Stacy, please take the floor. The floor is yours.
Great, thanks. So I'm Meredith Eilers. I practice primarily litigation with Olafson and Eilers in Portland, and I'll let Stacy introduce herself. Stacy.
I'm Stacy Stitham, and I practice also primarily litigation at Brannon Isaacson in Lewiston. And Meredith and I planned this out about an hour ago, so you will be impressed with the smooth organization of our presentation today.
Yes. So yeah, as we mentioned, we thought that it would be interesting to share a recent experience that we had conducting a 5.5-day bench trial in person in Augusta in the last week of September. I will give a little bit of the background of the case, just so you sort of know what we were dealing with, and Stacy is going to discuss the ways in which we had to adapt it to be able to pull this off in the COVID era. So to get the first question everyone has out of the way, this was a bench trial, not a jury trial. So obviously, I don't know if anybody's had jury trials yet, but there will be different pieces for that. This was a business court case. It was a family business dispute under the judicial dissolution provisions of the Maine Business Corporation Act. There were numerous parties. There were 2 corporate parties, 2 individual parties, and 1 party consisting of a group of individuals. This case was originally scheduled to go to trial on Monday, March 16th, before Justice Murphy, an auspicious day. We found out at the end of the day on Friday, the 13th, after spending obviously a lot of time being ready to go, that the courts were closing and the trial was indefinitely postponed. At first, it was rescheduled for late June, but then obviously that didn't happen. So after several conferences over the course of spring and summer, the trial was ultimately rescheduled for September 28th. And it was moved from Portland to Augusta due to the need to find a courtroom large enough to accommodate all the parties and attorneys while also allowing for social distancing. Most of the witnesses were in state, but we had 1 expert coming from New Hampshire and 3 witnesses located in Florida or Missouri, and those folks had to testify remotely. I also wanted to note that we filed a motion for special permission to conduct this trial. And as grounds for that motion, we cited that it was a rather large trial with quite a few parties and witnesses, including several experts. We had already been postponed for over 6 months, and we all felt that this would be unwieldy to do entirely remotely. And of course, we were all willing to abide by the COVID protocols, and after much discussion, felt that we would be able to pull it off, abiding by COVID protocols. So Stacy will now let you know how we pulled it off.
Thanks, Meredith. So it started with the sort of standard COVID questions that you got. You would show up at the courthouse with your many boxes of binders ready for trial and have to go through security. And security was also had added COVID protocol questions. So the typical, have you been out of state in 14 days? Have you been exposed to anyone with COVID? Things like that. We arrived at the courtroom and found that the way the tables were arranged to allow for social distancing really meant that only one person could sit at counsel table. So given the number of parties involved, we had 6 counsel tables. They brought in spare counsel tables for us to have sort of beyond the well. And client representatives, co-counsels, things like that had to be moved to out in the wings, out in the audience. So everyone was spaced apart. If you had the kind of note to pass to your co-counsel, the opportunity to do that somewhat discreetly didn't really exist. So you just kind of had to tiptoe across the courtroom and hand the note or the like. Mask wearing was required at all times, including when questioning witnesses or while the witnesses were testifying. So we were very strict about that. We were made to understand that that was a very strict requirement. So even if the mask started slipping down over the nose, everyone was pulling it up. Everyone was treating that very seriously, just given the number of people in the courtroom, even spaced apart. After a while, both Meredith and I were talking about how that seemed unusual at first, but after a while, we really just simply adjusted to it and didn't really even notice that everyone was wearing masks while testifying. It was still relatively easy to hear everyone. There was plexiglass up in front of the court reporter, in front of the judge, in front of the witness stand, which was periodically cleaned. You would have breaks in the trial to do that. And the courtroom had a limited capacity, despite the fact that in ordinary days, it could take many people into account with ease. We had a limit of, I think, 20 people. And at one point we were at maximum capacity for the room, but fortunately we never were at a point where we were about to exceed capacity and had to turn people away. In terms of how the trial was conducted and not just the layout, attorneys were allowed to address both the court and the witnesses from counsel table, which was a little difficult to get used to. Sort of sitting down at your table and talking to Justice Murphy or talking to the witness. Some people did pop up and use the podium, but certainly for those of us, at least in the front couple of rows, we just addressed the witness from the table, which did make it a little bit easier to use the binders and things like that. We had 3 witnesses that testified remotely that Meredith already mentioned. And the court, after some discussion with the clerk's office, decided to just let us handle that logistics. So what we did is we decided to use Zoom links. And we sent sort of all-day meeting appointments to the witness directly so that we would have the flexibility to sort of call them whenever, because as everybody knows, you can imagine that a witness is going to be called after lunch, but it turns out to be the end of the day or even the next day. So we sent these sort of big blocks of time appointments. And when it was time to bring the witness up, we actually plugged the individual attorneys plugged their laptop into the document projector on the podium and the HDMI link coming out of the document projector. And we were able to beam the witnesses to the big screen in the courtroom and have the audio pipe through the system. It was actually easier to hear the remote witnesses than frankly anybody else. So that worked out well. There were a couple of wrinkles. One of the witnesses was a rebuttal witness and had to view another witness's testimony that they would be commenting on. So we sort of dealt with that by, I dialed in via the courtroom Wi-Fi to my Zoom appointment, got our witness up. and then put my laptop on a box in a chair next to the witness stand. And he watched from Florida. So he was able to hear from that vantage point. It was a little unusual, but we found the furniture to make it happen. The other kind of wrinkle with dealing with the remote witnesses was that it was hard for them to hear anybody who wasn't at the podium laptop that was sort of plugged into the system. So when Justice Murphy was trying to swear them in, we did have to shout a little bit to have her heard. But aside from that, it was relatively smooth sailing. The only other thing I can think of in terms of a material difference from a normal time trial would be just sort of the logistical obstacles you don't really think about. So the case was moved from Portland, from Southern Maine, where most of all of us had our offices, to Augusta, where we really didn't have office space. And in sort of normal times, you might want to kind of consider getting a conference room for a breakout space or a war room. But that was very difficult to do just given, the realities of the pandemic. So there were a lot of people kind of eating sandwiches furtively in corners of various courtroom hallways, and conferences with your witnesses in the parking lot, things like that. So there were some challenges there, but frankly, we were able to pull off all the substantive things that we needed to do. So those are pretty much the main differences. And I think both Meredith and I would welcome any questions from anybody who has them.
Stacy, I received it. Oops, go ahead. Okay, I did get a question already. So in terms of all these little extra things that you had to do, how much time do you think it added to the trial? Like double, 1.5? What are you thinking?
I don't think it added much time at all. I mean, keep in mind that this was a bench trial, so it already seemed like we were way ahead in the schedule than if it had been a jury trial. People were very cooperative. People really didn't need to be told to wear the mask or anything like that, or cleaning was mostly done during existing breaks. And the ability to set up Zoom witnesses actually went surprisingly smooth. That was probably the biggest time we needed to take a break, but we didn't, knock on wood, we didn't hit any technological hiccups with that.
Now,
Yeah.
Stacy, go ahead.
Yeah, just one other thing I would add is we all did tour the room the week before to check out the tech situation and the logistics. So we came in on the first day of trial prepared, kind of knowing what plugs we needed and what we needed to get everything set up. And then we were able to do the remote setup just during usual courtroom breaks. And I don't think it added much time at all, actually.
So that would be my question is, it doesn't sound like it added time to the trial, but how much extra time do you think this bench trial cost you in preparation because of the hybrid type of situation?
Well, I would say that most of the added preparation came from having fully prepared for a trial in March, and then having taken essentially a multi-month break, and then having to sort of redo it. With the remote witnesses, all three of them were relatively short witnesses had, so we really most of the outlines were pretty short. I did find myself redoing my remote witnesses outline, but just given the shortness of it, it didn't take too much time.
Okay. And did you have any more questions, Angela? Because I have another one while people are thinking of any questions.
It looks like I have one in the chat function for me privately. Just asking about sidebar conferences, and we did not need them, just given that it was a bench trial.
I don't have any other questions right now, Thad.
All right, so I don't know if you've had a chance to look since your trial, Meredith and Stacy, but there was, I think it was PMO SJC 5 came out as amended, if I'm remembering the right number. And the amendment was essentially to make hybrid trials like you had the exception. And meaning that I think it says in order to have a hybrid trial now, you actually have to file for permission to do so. how do you envision that change in PMO SJC 5 affecting you in the future?
We filed for permission for this one.
Okay.
So to that extent, yeah, we have laid out our reasons for why we thought it was some of the key things being we did do that here and was successful.
Excellent. Are there any other questions from the group? All right, well.
I have a quick question on rebuttal witnesses and sharing documents through Zoom.
Yes. That's a very good question. So originally we had intended to actually share documents on Zoom, but we realized that logistically that was going to be somewhat difficult because we were basically all competing for the same screen, so that if we had a document up, it would be difficult to see the witness and vice versa. So we actually just settled on having everyone refer to paper copies of their documents. We sent the exhibits that we plan to use with the rebuttal witness in advance, and they referred to their own documents, and we in the courtroom each referred to our paper set. So we did kind of give up on the idea of showing documents via Zoom.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that is probably one way in which preparation was slightly different, because we did need to make sure that the remote witnesses had the exhibits in advance. So there were copies separately, because we were having just too much to try to also share the screens.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple more questions. What were the grounds for a hybrid trial?
Were frankly the size of the trial, length, and the number of parties. So we anticipated it was going to be at least a week. We had at least 5 different parties, 4 or 5 different sets of attorneys, a number of expert witnesses, including lengthy expert testimony. And we had already been postponed for over 6 months. So we just generally felt as a group that this was going to be unwieldy to do remotely, and that we had already postponed it a lot. And then we also emphasized that we felt that we could abide by the COVID protocols in carrying off the trial. So that's more or less what we cited.
So then I guess this person had a follow-up. So why hybrid as opposed to totally online?
Well, actually all the parties and all the attorneys were in Maine, and we just had mostly a couple of experts and 1 fact witness who were located in other states. And so we felt like the balance of testimony could happen in person, and that we would just need the remote stuff for the few folks who were not there. So we felt that, most of it could happen in person, and so it made sense to do so.
The last question I have, do you think the masks made it much more difficult to evaluate the demeanor of the witnesses?
I didn't find that to be true. I could imagine that it would be in perhaps a different case than this one. But in this case, I think it was pretty easy. We were dealing with a lot of strong personalities, and I think it was pretty easy to gauge their demeanor even with the masks on.
I agree.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Stacy and Meredith, for joining us for Bar Talk today and sharing. And we gleaned a little bit from your experience. I appreciate that.
Thanks for having us.
We're good.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. Now, Angela, could you give us an update on the business side of things?
I will. It's fairly brief. And it hasn't really changed much from last week. We do have an election that will be going on in District 3, which is Cumberland County, for the Board of Governors. We have 5 individuals who have been nominated for 2 seats. And when that election goes on between November 2nd and the 20th, members of that district will be able to vote. And the 2 individuals who receive the highest number of votes will take the 2 seats. Legal year in review. registration is available online. It will be held virtually this year over the course of a week, basically from Monday through Thursday of November 16th through the 19th. Again, you can register online, and you can register, pick and choose which sessions you'd like to go to. It has been decided that the Winter Bar Conference in January will also be held virtually. And we just sent out a request for proposals last week. You'll be receiving, we'll do that for the next couple of weeks as we get proposals in. I think the deadline for those is November 20th. So if you have an idea for a program, we'd love to hear from you. And then next week, we have District Court Chief Judge Jed French joining us on November 2nd. Hard to believe next week is November.
All right. Thank you very much, Angela. Also hard to believe that November 3rd is another very special day. Try to make sure you have a chance to do your civic duty by then. Also, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot, Angela. We also have our big CLE called Bridging the Gap coming up too, right? And that's in December, is that right?
Actually, it will not be held in December after all. That we had a recent change, and you have not heard about it yet, so that's on me. But because the CLE committee felt that Bridging the Gap is very important to have that in person, kind of like we did with the Leadership Academy. It has been postponed until I believe it's April of next year. And the individuals that would normally have the credits, they get up to 2 years worth of credits that will cover them for this year and next year. And there's been a special exception made by the Board of Overseers for that.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like if someone was interested in that, then that they should probably take a close look at the legal year in review.
Yes, and that information is available on our website too.
Excellent. All right, and on the personal side of things, following with Bill Nugent's recommendation of finding thankful things for us individually, I was just sharing mine that recently I've been actually leaving the office by 5:30 or 6 o'clock so that I can get home and share time in the kitchen with my wife. So I think that about any alibis, Angela, before we end this show on time?
No, sir. Oh, wait, I have a chat. No, I guess not. That was just a thank you.
Excellent. Thank you again, and we'll plan on seeing everyone November 2nd. Bye.
Thank you.